There is a very specific, suffocating kind of silence that falls over a room of 300 high society guests when the bride steps up to the microphone, not to give a tearful toast, but to cancel a $300,000 wedding right before the first course is served. That was me, Sarah Miller, standing in the center of the grand ballroom, the heavy crystal chandeliers casting a perfect golden glow on my custom-fitted white silk gown. My makeup was still flawless. My hands gripping the cold metal of the microphone were entirely steady. And as I looked directly at table 1, the table where my future husband, Julian Vance, sat next to his mother, Eleanor, I felt absolutely nothing but a freezing, undeniable clarity. I was walking away from the man I thought was the love of my life. I was walking away from a future of real estate empires, exclusive country clubs, and generational wealth. And I was doing it all because of a tiny, handwritten piece of cardstock, a seating arrangement tag that someone had quietly, deliberately placed at table 14, a cramped corner wedged right between the swinging doors of the kitchen and a designated spot for dirty dishes. Someone had decided that the people I loved most in the world belonged in the shadows. And when I found out exactly who did it and the sickening reason why, I made a decision that shattered everything. It was not a sudden, impulsive emotional breakdown. It was the most lucid, calculated decision of my entire adult life. But before I tell you how a single piece of paper revealed the darkest, most manipulative betrayal I have ever experienced, and exactly what I said into that microphone to bring the Vance family empire to a grinding halt, take a second to check if you are subscribed to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. My name is Sarah Miller. I am 31 years old, a third-grade teacher at a public school in the suburbs of Chicago, and I come from a family built on calluses, cheap coffee, and pure grit. My father, Arthur Miller, has spent the last 40 years as an auto mechanic. If you look at his hands, the grease is permanently settled into the deep lifelines of his palms. No amount of industrial soap can wash away the evidence of how hard he has worked to keep a roof over our heads. He is a man of few words and endless sacrifices. My mother, Martha, spent 3 decades as a hotel housekeeper. She woke up at 4 in the morning, 6 days a week, to scrub floors and make beds for strangers so that her daughters would never have to. And my older sister, Emily, was the fierce protector of our house. While my parents worked double shifts to make ends meet, Emily was the one who made sure my homework was done and defended our family against anyone who dared to look down on us. We are not wealthy people. We do not have trust funds or vacation homes in the Hamptons. We have a modest one-story house where the screen door always squeaks in the summer, and the smell of my mother's homemade apple pie masks the draft coming from the old windows. We are ordinary, fiercely loyal, hardworking people. And I am not going to sugarcoat this. You need to know one crucial fact right from the start. I almost married a monster disguised as a gentleman. The clearest sign that Julian Vance was the wrong man did not come during a screaming match. It did not come from an affair or a dramatic late-night confession. It came wrapped in white linen and silver cutlery, disguised as a simple matter of catering logistics. It came from a profound, deeply rooted belief that my family was nothing more than a stain on their pristine reputation. To understand how a simple seating arrangement could completely destroy a relationship, you first have to understand the specific people who were assigned to those seats and what it took for them just to be in that room. When I said my father was a mechanic, I did not just mean it was his job, it was his entire life. When he finally retired a few years ago, he did it on a fraction of the pension he actually deserved. Yet, when Julian and I got engaged, my father pulled me aside, handed me a sealed envelope, and told me he was paying for my wedding dress. I tried to refuse. I knew exactly what was in his bank account, but he looked me dead in the eye and said that paying for his daughter to look like a queen on her wedding day was a promise he had made to himself when I was 7 years old. He had been putting away $20 a month into a coffee tin in the garage for over 2 decades. He bought the very silk gown I was wearing the night I called the wedding off. My mother, Martha, did not buy a new outfit for the wedding. She told me she could not find anything she liked at the department stores. but I knew the truth. She wanted the budget to go toward the flowers. The night before the ceremony, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, using a damp rag to carefully polish a pair of black pumps she had bought on clearance 7 years ago. She polished them with the absolute reverence of someone preparing for a sacred event. And then there was Emily. My older sister, Emily, watched all of this preparation with a quiet, tight-lipped expression. Emily is the kind of woman who can spot a liar from a mile away. She is fiercely protective, the kind of sister who would take a bullet for you, but will also tell you when you are making a massive mistake. She wanted to be happy for me, but I could tell she was holding her breath. She saw the cracks in the foundation long before I did. Because on the other side of this story is the Vance family. I met Julian Vance 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the public school district where I teach. His family's real estate investment firm was one of the corporate sponsors. He was standing near the open bar, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He was charming. He was magnetic. He did not talk over me. He listened intently, asking me questions about my 3rd grade classroom as if I were the most fascinating person in the room. When you grow up counting pennies, and suddenly a man who has never had to look at a price tag in his life decides that you are the center of his universe, it does something to your judgment. It is blinding. He swept me off my feet in a way that felt like a movie. He sent expensive floral arrangements to the school office. He took me to restaurants where the menus did not have prices on them, subtly placing his hand on the small of my back to guide me through rooms where I clearly did not belong. I felt completely out of my depth, but he would look at me and smile, and I convinced myself that love was enough to bridge the gap between our two worlds. But looking back, the warning signs were always there, buried under layers of polite, high society vocabulary. The first major red flag, the one I willfully ignored, happened about 3 months into our relationship. We were sitting on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, drinking wine that tasted like liquid gold, talking about our childhoods. I was telling him about my dad, how proud I was of the business he had built with his bare hands, how the smell of motor oil always made me feel safe. Julian swirled the wine in his glass, looking out over the city skyline. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He tilted his head and said, in the softest, most polite voice imaginable, "There is a real, raw dignity in blue-collar labor, Sarah. It takes a very specific, simple kind of mind to be satisfied with waking up and getting your hands dirty every single day without wanting more out of life. I think it is actually very quaint. Simple. Quaint." He did not say it as an insult. He delivered it like a compliment. But it was the kind of compliment you give to a stray dog that managed to learn a trick. It was a verbal pat on the head. I remember my stomach dropping for just a fraction of a second. A sudden, freezing spike of intuition telling me that this man did not respect where I came from. He viewed my family not as equals, but as a charming little charity case he had decided to adopt. But I pushed the feeling down. I told myself he just grew up differently. I told myself he did not mean it the way it sounded. I built a massive, beautiful castle in the sand, entirely ignoring the fact that the tide was coming in. And it was his mother, Eleanor Vance, who would eventually summon the storm that washed it all away. Meeting Eleanor Vance for the first time felt less like an introduction and more like a hostile corporate deposition. Julian brought me to his family's sprawling estate in the Gold Coast neighborhood for a Sunday dinner. I remember walking through the massive oak double doors, my heels clicking against the imported marble floors, feeling an immediate, suffocating drop in the temperature. Eleanor was waiting for us in a sitting room that looked like a museum exhibit, beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. She did not hug me. She extended a hand with perfectly manicured, icy fingers, her eyes scanning me from the top of my head down to the scuffs on my practical shoes. She had this uncanny, terrifying ability to look at a person and instantly calculate their exact net worth. And the moment she looked at me, I knew my balance had come up severely lacking. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth and modulated, "Julian tells me you work in public education? How incredibly noble. We recently looked into a philanthropic venture in that sector, but honestly, the return on investment is just terribly inefficient. It is so hard to build equity in a system that is fundamentally broken. Wouldn't you agree? It was a trap, perfectly disguised as polite conversation. She was using corporate jargon to tell me that my life's work, teaching children, was a bad investment. That I was a bad investment. I sat at that massive mahogany dining table for 2 hours, watching as Eleanor and Julian's father threw around terms like asset liquidations, portfolio diversification, and shareholder optics. They built an invisible wall of wealth around the table, intentionally speaking a language they knew I did not understand, isolating me on an island of silence. I spent the entire evening staring at my plate, terrified of using the wrong fork, terrified of opening my mouth and confirming what Eleanor already believed, that I was an uncultured outsider. You are probably screaming at the screen right now. You are probably asking, why didn't you just get up and leave? Why did you stay with a man whose family treated you like a charity case? The answer is the velvet cage. Psychological manipulation does not start with a slap in the face. It starts with a hand gently holding yours under the table. While Eleanor was surgically dismantling my confidence, Julian was sitting right next to me, his thumb rubbing comforting circles into the back of my hand. When we got in the car to leave, I was shaking with frustration. But before I could even voice my anger, Julian pulled me close. He kissed my forehead and sighed, playing the exhausted peacemaker. "I am so sorry about my mother, Sarah," he whispered. "She is just very old school. She operates like a CEO because that is how she was raised. She doesn't mean to be intimidating. You just have to give her time to see how amazing you are. Please just let it go this once, for me." Do you see the brilliance of the trap? He validated my feelings just enough to keep me from leaving, but the end result was always exactly the same. I was the one who had to compromise. I was the one who had to swallow my pride, adjust my boundaries, and tolerate the disrespect, all in the name of keeping the peace. He positioned himself as my protector against his mother, when in reality, he was using her as an attack dog while keeping his own hands perfectly clean. My sister, Emily, saw right through it. I made the mistake of bringing Julian to our house for a Sunday barbecue. My dad was grilling in the backyard, wearing his faded, grease-stained t-shirt. Julian showed up in a designer polo, holding a bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. He spent the entire afternoon nodding politely at my parents, but looking at his luxury watch every 15 minutes. Later that night, as I was helping Emily wash the dishes, she turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and looked at me with a terrifyingly serious expression. "He is trying to change you, Sarah," Emily said, her voice dropping to a whisper so our parents wouldn't hear. "Have you noticed how you dress differently when you are with him? How you talk differently? He doesn't love you. He loves the project of you. You are his little rebellion against his mother, but the second things get hard, he is going to choose that trust fund over you." I defended him. I fought with my sister for the first time in my life. I told Emily she was just jealous, a cruel accusation that I immediately regretted but refused to take back. I was in so deep that defending Julian became my default survival mechanism. A month later, Julian proposed. It was not intimate. It was a highly orchestrated event on a private yacht, complete with a hired photographer and a diamond ring so large it caught on my sweaters. It felt less like a declaration of love and more like a corporate acquisition. I said yes, because I thought the ring was a promise that things would finally get better. I thought becoming his wife would finally earn me a seat at the table. I had no idea that accepting that ring was the exact moment Eleanor Vance decided to completely erase my existence. The real nightmare was not the dating phase. The real nightmare began the second we started planning the wedding, and the illusion of my choices was violently ripped away. There is a dangerous, pervasive myth that planning a wedding is the happiest time of a woman's life. For me, it was a slow, systematic erasure of my identity. The illusion of choice is a terrifying weapon. When you are given two options that you hate, choosing one does not make you powerful. It just makes you complicit in your own defeat. That was the exact strategy Eleanor Vance used for 8 agonizing months. She did not explicitly tell me I could not make decisions. Instead, she hijacked the entire process under the guise of generosity. Because the Vance family was funding the majority of the reception, Eleanor hired her own luxury event coordinator. They did not ask for my vision. They presented me with mood boards. When I suggested a rustic theme with wildflowers, Eleanor let out a soft, pitying laugh that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, dear," she murmured, patting my arm. "Wildflowers are lovely for a backyard barbecue, but the Vance family is hosting state senators and the board of directors for 3 major banks. We have a certain standard to uphold. The aesthetic will be white orchids and imported crystal." Julian agrees. And whenever I looked to Julian for support, he was conveniently distracted. He was always answering a crucial work email or stepping out to take a phone call, leaving me alone in the shark tank with his mother. When I confronted him later in private, his script never changed. "She is paying for it, Sarah. Let her have her little country club aesthetic. Who cares about the flowers? At the end of the day, I just want to marry you." He made me feel completely unreasonable for wanting a voice in my own wedding. I was slowly being conditioned to believe that having an opinion was synonymous with being ungrateful. The only boundary I absolutely refused to surrender was my wedding dress. I had taken the envelope of money my father had saved for 20 years, and I bought a classic, elegant silk gown from a small boutique. It was not a designer label. It did not cost $20,000. But every time I looked at it, I saw my father's grease-stained hands. I saw the overtime shifts. I saw pure, unconditional love. When Eleanor demanded to see the dress, I showed her a photo. She stared at my phone screen for a painfully long time, her lips pursed in a tight, judgmental line. "It is very sweet," she finally said, handing the phone back as if it were contaminated. "Off the rack, I assume? Well, we can always distract from the simplicity with a phenomenal veil. I will have my jeweler send over some diamond hairpieces." I swallowed the insult. I swallowed it because I was desperately trying to keep the peace. But the true battle, the one that laid the groundwork for the ultimate betrayal, was the guest list. We were expecting 300 guests. When we sat down in Eleanor's dining room to finalize the numbers, she slid a leather-bound binder across the table. "I have already finalized the Vance side," she announced, tapping her manicured fingernail against the paper. 250 guests. Business partners, extended family, the country club committee. That leaves 50 spots for your side, Sarah. I assume that is more than enough for your relatives and acquaintances? 50 spots. I looked at the sprawling list of Vance corporate investors, people Julian had not spoken to in years, and realized my own family was being treated as a minority quota at my own wedding. I had to cut off childhood friends, neighbors who had watched me grow up, and colleagues who had supported me through my first years of teaching, just to make room for Julian's father's golf buddies. When I brought the finalized invitations back to my childhood home, my older sister, Emily, was sitting at the kitchen table. She watched me cross out names from my personal list with a heavy black marker, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Emily reached out, grabbed the marker from my hand, and slammed it onto the table. "Wake up, Sarah," she snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Just wake up and look at what you are doing. You are literally erasing the people who love you to make room for people who don't even know your last name." "Emily, please," I pleaded, rubbing my temples. "Julian's family is paying for the venue. It is a numbers game. It is just logistics." "Logistics?" Emily stood up, her chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. "You are not a bride to them, Sarah. You are a prop. You are a cute little accessory they are dressing up for a corporate gala. Mom and Dad have been walking on eggshells for months so they don't embarrass you in front of these snobs. Dad bought a new suit he can't afford just so Eleanor won't look at him like he is trash. Do you see what this is doing to us?" "Julian loves me," I shouted back, my voice cracking. It was the battle cry of a woman who was terrified that her sister was right. Emily looked at me with a profound, devastating sadness. "If he loved you," she whispered, "he would never let his mother treat you like a second-class citizen. But you are too blinded by the shiny ring to see the leash attached to it." She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the guest list, feeling a heavy, sickening knot forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just pre-wedding anxiety. I told myself that once the papers were signed and the reception was over, we would start our own life, away from Eleanor's shadow. I was completely, utterly wrong. The knot in my stomach was not anxiety. It was instinct. It was my subconscious screaming at me that the trap had finally snapped shut. I just did not realize the true extent of the cruelty until the morning of the wedding, when the sun rose, the white orchids were arranged, and the seating chart was quietly, maliciously altered. The morning of March 23rd did not feel like the beginning of a happily ever after. It felt like the morning of an execution. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the master bedroom of a 5-star hotel suite in downtown Chicago. It was a room Eleanor Vance had booked specifically because, as she delicately put it, my childhood home was simply too cramped for a professional hair and makeup team to operate efficiently. The suite was undeniably breathtaking, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the jagged city skyline and the steel-gray waters of Lake Michigan. It was also completely, utterly sterile. There were no framed family photos on the nightstand, no smell of my mother's morning coffee brewing in the kitchen, no familiar squeaky floorboards. There was just the quiet, expensive hum of the central air conditioning and the suffocating scent of hundreds of white orchids that Eleanor had ordered to be placed in every corner of the room. By 7:30, the suite was swarming with a small army of event coordinators, stylists, and makeup artists, all dressed in matching black uniforms. They moved with the terrifying clinical efficiency of an emergency room trauma team. They did not speak to me as a living, breathing person. They spoke about me as if I were a piece of antique furniture that needed to be polished and staged before an open house. "Tilt her chin up," one of them barked to an assistant. "We need to contour the jawline heavier for the dramatic lighting at the venue." Julian's mother requested flawless profile shots. I sat immobile in the velvet makeup chair, staring at my own reflection in the oversized vanity mirror, feeling completely detached from the woman staring back at me. I was a prop. I was the final, expensive accessory being assembled for the Vance family's corporate gala. At 8:15, there was a hesitant, soft knock at the grand double doors of the suite. It was not the sharp, authoritative rap of the wedding planners. It was the knock of someone who felt they were intruding in a place they did not belong. When the door opened, my parents and my older sister, Emily, stepped into the marble foyer. The contrast was so sharp it physically ached in my chest. My father, Arthur, was wearing the new suit Emily had warned me about. It was dark navy, clearly bought off the rack from a mid-tier department store, and the shoulders were just a fraction of an inch too wide for his frame. But his hair was slicked back neatly, and he stood perfectly straight, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, the exact kind of flowers Eleanor had vetoed months ago. My mother, Martha, walked in wearing a simple, modest, plum-colored dress. She was carrying her old, carefully polished black pumps in a plastic grocery bag so she would not accidentally scuff the hotel's pristine floors. Emily walked directly behind them, her jaw set tight, her eyes immediately scanning the room like a soldier assessing enemy territory. The lead coordinator, a woman named Claire with a wireless earpiece and a digital tablet, stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at my family, her gaze dropping to the plastic bag in my mother's hand and the humble wildflowers in my father's grip. She did not smile. She did not offer them a seat or a glass of water. She simply tapped her earpiece, turned slightly away, and whispered, "The bride's relatives are here. Keep them out of the background for the videographers establishing shots." I heard it. My older sister Emily heard it too. Emily's hands immediately balled into tight fists at her sides, but she caught my eye in the mirror and forced herself to exhale, swallowing her fierce anger for my sake. My parents, bless them, did not notice, or if they did, they chose with profound grace to ignore it. They were entirely focused on me. My dad walked up to my chair, placing a rough, permanently calloused hand gently on my bare shoulder. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with unshakable pride. He did not look at the extravagant suite, the glaring coordinators, or the ridiculous white orchids. He only looked at me. My mother carefully unpacked my wedding dress, the simple, elegant silk gown my father had paid for with 2 decades of garage savings. As I stepped into it, feeling the smooth fabric slip over my skin, the heavy, elaborate facade of Eleanor Vance's high society wedding faded away for just a fraction of a second. Standing there while my mother zipped up the back, I was not a corporate asset or a charity case. I was just a daughter wrapped up in her parents' love. It was a fleeting moment of peace. It was the terrifying, deceptive calm before a catastrophic storm. At 10 o'clock, the convoy of black town cars arrived to transport us to the venue. I was scheduled to do a final solitary walkthrough of the grand ballroom before the guests began arriving. I have always been a teacher. My brain is wired to be meticulously organized, and I never assume a task is completed correctly until I check it myself. I walked into that venue expecting to verify the table linens, the lighting, and the centerpieces. I had absolutely no idea that I was about to embark on a grueling, humiliating walk from table 1 to the darkest corner of the room, where the final, fatal trap had been set and waiting for me. The grand ballroom of the country club was a breathtaking monument to intimidating, unapologetic wealth. When I stepped through the arched mahogany doorways for my final walkthrough, the sheer scale of the room temporarily knocked the breath out of my lungs. Sunlight poured through massive stained glass windows, catching the edges of 300 crystal water goblets perfectly aligned on tables draped in heavy, imported white linen. A string quartet was quietly tuning their instruments in the corner. The air smelled of expensive beeswax candles and thousands of white orchids. It was flawless. It was a magazine cover. And it was entirely fake. As a teacher, I have a deeply ingrained habit of double-checking everything. You never assume a permission slip is signed just because a student says it is, and you never assume a wedding is perfectly arranged just because an event coordinator gives you a thumbs up. I walked over to the coordinator's podium near the entrance and picked up the master seating ledger. I wanted to see it one last time. I wanted to see my family's names officially anchored at the center of this beautiful new life I was stepping into. I started with the seating chart map, my eyes immediately moving to Table 1. Table 1 was the head table, an elongated masterpiece positioned directly at the edge of the polished hardwood dance floor, commanding the best view in the entire room. This was where the parents of the bride and groom were supposed to sit with us. It was what we had formally agreed upon 3 weeks ago when I explicitly wrote out the names with my own pen. I walked over to Table 1, my silk dress trailing softly against the floor, and began reading the heavy, gold-embossed place cards arranged meticulously around the centerpiece. Julian Vance, Sarah Miller, Eleanor Vance, Richard Vance, Marcus Vance, Victoria Vance. I stopped. I frowned, my eyes scanning the remaining cards on the table. There were 4 more names, all belonging to senior partners at the Vance real estate firm. Men I had met exactly once for 5 minutes at a corporate cocktail hour. 10 seats, 10 gold-embossed cards. Arthur Miller was not there. Martha Miller was not there. My chest tightened, a sharp, sudden spike of anxiety piercing through the lingering calm of the morning. I told myself to breathe. I told myself it was just a logistical error. Perhaps Claire, the coordinator, had set up a separate, equally prominent table just for my family to give them more space. Yes, that had to be it. I picked up my heavy silk skirt and began to walk. I walked to Table 2, directly adjacent to the dance floor. Vance extended family. I walked to Table 3, country club board members, Table 4, Table 5, Table 6. Julian's college fraternity brothers, investors, local politicians. With every table I passed, the physical environment of the ballroom began to subtly, aggressively shift. The floral centerpieces became slightly less dense. The heavy silver cutlery was replaced by standard stainless steel. The lighting grew dimmer, further away from the grand chandeliers. And with every step, the cold, creeping dread in my stomach expanded, morphing from confusion into a visceral, suffocating panic. I kept walking. Table 10, table 11, table 12. I was now at the very back of the ballroom. The majestic acoustics of the space were completely gone here, violently replaced by the chaotic, mechanical noises of the catering staff. I could hear the aggressive clattering of industrial metal pans, the shouting of the head chef, and the heavy, rhythmic squeak of the wooden kitchen doors swinging wildly open and shut. The air here did not smell like orchids or beeswax. It smelled intensely of frying oil, roasted garlic, and the sour dampness of wet dish rags. And right there, shoved into a claustrophobic corner between the swinging kitchen doors and a metal service station where busboys dumped half-eaten plates of food, was table 14. Table 14 was a physical insult. It was noticeably smaller than the others, a cheap folding table hastily draped in a thinner tablecloth. The chairs did not have the elegant silk sashes that adorned the rest of the room. There was no towering floral arrangement, only a single pathetic votive candle sitting unlit in the center. Parked less than 3 feet away was a multi-tiered metal utility cart loaded with dirty cocktail napkins and spare water pitchers. I stood frozen, staring at that table for a span of time I cannot accurately measure. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. The ballroom was bustling around me, waiters rushing past, florists making final adjustments, but all I could hear was the blood roaring in my own ears. With trembling fingers, I reached down and picked up the 3 crisp, calligraphed place cards resting on the uneven table. Arthur Miller, Martha Miller, Emily Miller. They had put them next to the trash. They had taken the man who broke his back for 40 years to pay for the dress I was currently wearing, the woman who scrubbed hotel toilets so I could go to college, and the sister who fiercely protected me my entire life. And they had banished them to the darkest, dirtiest corner of the room. They had hidden them away like a shameful secret. I did not cry. That is the most surprising thing about that moment. The tears simply refused to come. When you experience a betrayal of that magnitude, anger is not hot. It is not hysterical. True, absolute rage is freezing cold. As I stood there gripping those 3 pieces of paper, the last remaining illusion of my fairy tale evaporated into the greasy air of the kitchen doorway. This was not a coordinator's mistake. This was a calculated, deliberate assassination of my family's dignity. Someone had specifically ordered this. Someone had looked at a map of this room and decided that the Millers did not deserve to be seen, and I knew exactly who it was. But more importantly, I needed to know if the man I was about to marry had let it happen. I turned my back on table 14, my hands curling into tight fists, and began the long walk toward the groom's dressing suite. The bride was dead. There was only the daughter of Arthur and Martha Miller left, and she was going to burn this entire charade to the ground. I did not run. Running is what a panicked bride does when she gets cold feet. I walked. My posture was perfectly straight, my steps measured and deliberate. The heavy silk of my father's dress swept across the polished floorboards like a quiet storm rolling into the harbor. My first target was Claire, the lead wedding coordinator. I found her near the grand entrance, furiously tapping on her digital tablet. When she looked up and saw my reflection in the gilded mirrors, her professional, tight-lipped smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She knew exactly why I was standing there. I held up the 3 place cards. I did not raise my voice. 30 years of watching my father handle difficult clients had taught me that whoever loses their temper first loses the war. Who moved them? I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. Claire swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. Sarah, there were some last-minute logistical shifts required for the catering flow. Mrs. Vance requested a minor adjustment to the floor plan this morning to better accommodate the senior partners. A minor adjustment, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And did my fiancé know about this adjustment? Claire looked at me, her professional mask slipping into genuine discomfort. She lowered her voice. Mrs. Vance suggested it, but yes. Julian signed off on the revised map an hour ago. He said you were busy with hair and makeup and shouldn't be disturbed. I did not blink. I simply turned away and walked past her, heading straight for the groom's private dressing suite down the East Wing corridor. Every step down that thickly carpeted hallway felt like walking underwater. The walls were lined with oil paintings of historic country club members, older men in expensive suits staring down at me with the same hollow, calculating eyes I had seen at Eleanor Vance's dining table. My heart was pounding a violent rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was completely, terrifyingly clear. I needed to hear him say it. Even after Claire's confirmation, a tiny, pathetic part of my brain was still trying to build a lifeboat. I thought, maybe Julian didn't understand what he was signing. Maybe Eleanor ambushed him. Maybe if I walk in there and tell him what she did, he will be furious. He will grab my hand, march into that ballroom, and move the tables himself. I reached the heavy mahogany door of the groom's suite. It was cracked open just a few inches, likely left ajar by a passing waiter. I raised my hand to push it open, to burst into the room and demand the truth. But then I heard Eleanor's voice. It is just a matter of visual cohesion, Julian. You have to look at the bigger picture, she was saying. Her tone was crisp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of empathy. The photographer is charging us $15,000. The main spread in the society pages requires a certain aesthetic. I cannot have Arthur standing in the background looking like he just clocked out of a factory shift, and Martha hovering nervously in those dreadful scuffed shoes. My hand froze inches from the wood. I stopped breathing. The hallway around me faded into complete nothingness. I was entirely focused on the narrow sliver of light coming from the room, waiting for the man I loved to defend me. I waited for Julian to raise his voice. I waited for him to tell his mother that those were his future in-laws, that they had sacrificed everything, that she had no right to speak about them like they were defective merchandise. Instead, I heard the soft, familiar clinking of ice in a crystal glass. And then, I heard Julian's smooth, calm baritone. I know, Mother. You don't have to explain it to me. I handled it. She is going to throw a fit when she sees the seating arrangement, Eleanor warned, though she sounded more annoyed than concerned. No, she won't, Julian replied, his voice dripping with an easy, terrifying confidence. Sarah is reasonable. I will just tell her it was a venue requirement. Honestly, moving them to the back was the right call. Her parents are, well, they are simple people, Mother. They would be completely out of their depth sitting at the head table with the governor and the board of directors. They don't know the etiquette. They don't know the language. They will actually be much more comfortable sitting near the kitchen where they don't have to pretend to be something they are not. Simple people, more comfortable near the kitchen. I leaned heavily against the flocked wallpaper of the hallway, the physical weight of his words crashing down on me. Julian was not a victim of his mother's manipulation. He was the architect of it. The velvet cage was not a protective barrier against Eleanor. It was a trap he had built with his own 2 hands. He had spent 2 years playing the exhausted peacemaker, acting as if he was protecting me from his family's elitism, when in reality, he shared it completely. He did not view my family as his equals. He viewed them as an embarrassing logistical problem that needed to be managed and swept under the rug. And worse, he viewed me as a project. He thought I was so desperate for his money, his status, and his shiny diamond ring that I would willingly turn a blind eye to the profound humiliation of the people who gave me life. He thought he could train me to accept his cruelty, just as long as he wrapped it in a polite excuse. I looked down at the 3 place cards still gripped tightly in my hand. Arthur, Martha, Emily. The ink was slightly smudged from the sweat of my palm. In a movie, this would be the moment the bride kicks the door open. She would throw the place cards in his face, scream at the top of her lungs, slap him, and run away, sobbing down the hallway in a dramatic display of heartbreak. But I am Arthur Miller's daughter. When an engine is fundamentally broken, you don't scream at it. You don't cry over it. You shut it down, you cut the fuel line, and you walk away. I did not push the door open. I did not announce my presence. I let my hand fall back to my side. The devastating sadness I had felt moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated power. The illusion was dead, and its death set me completely free. I turned around and walked back down the hallway, heading toward the main lobby. The ceremony was supposed to start in 20 minutes. 300 guests were already taking their seats. The champagne was poured. The cameras were rolling. Julian and Eleanor Vance thought they could quietly push my family into the shadows without anyone noticing. They were about to find out exactly what happens when you hand a microphone to a public school teacher who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I found my family waiting in the grand foyer, just outside the massive mahogany doors of the ballroom. They had been ushered out of the way by the event coordinators, told to stand near the coat check so they wouldn't ruin the professional photographs being taken in the lobby. My father was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, looking completely out of place in his ill-fitting suit, yet maintaining a quiet, unbroken dignity. My mother was nervously adjusting the strap of her purse, trying to make herself look as small and unobtrusive as possible. Emily was glaring fiercely at a passing waiter, her arms crossed tight against her chest. When I walked up to them, Emily took one look at my face and knew. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just stepped forward, her posture shifting immediately into that of a protector ready for a war. "Where is Chloe?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Chloe, my maid of honor and one of my oldest friends, was a corporate lawyer. She appeared from the cloakroom area, holding a clipboard of vendor schedules. "The marriage license," I said, looking directly into Chloe's eyes. "Did we sign it yet?" Chloe frowned, sensing the absolute gravity in the air. She shook her head. "No. Eleanor insisted that the signing be a massive, staged photo opportunity after the first dance. The document is completely blank. Legally, Sarah, you are a single woman." That was the final piece of armor I needed. I looked at my father. I reached out and gently touched his rough, calloused hand. "Dad," I said softly, "I love you, and I am so sorry I almost let them do this to you." Before he could ask what I meant, I turned around and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. The room was packed. 300 guests were seated, the low, sophisticated murmur of high society chatter filling the cavernous space. Waiters in white gloves were pouring the first round of vintage champagne. At the front of the room, on a slightly elevated stage, the master of ceremonies was tapping the microphone, preparing to announce the grand entrance of the bride and groom. I did not wait for an introduction. I walked straight down the center aisle. The heavy silk of my father's dress rustled loudly against the hardwood floor. Heads began to turn. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they saw me walking alone, my face completely devoid of the blushing, radiant bridal smile they expected to see. I reached the stage, walked up the brief flight of stairs, and stood directly next to the MC. I gently but firmly took the microphone from his hand. He looked bewildered, opening his mouth to protest, but 30 years of managing a classroom of rowdy children gives you a certain kind of unspoken authority. He stepped back. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw my colleagues from the elementary school looking confused. I saw the country club elite pausing with their champagne flutes halfway to their mouths. And sitting dead center at table 1, I saw Eleanor Vance. Her posture was rigidly straight, her eyes narrowing in sudden, sharp suspicion. Julian was just walking into the room from a side door, stopping dead in his tracks when he saw me standing on the stage. "Good evening," I said. My voice echoed through the massive speakers, crisp, steady, and entirely unshaken. The remaining chatter in the room instantly died. I want to thank you all for traveling to be here tonight. This is an undeniably beautiful room. The orchids are stunning, the champagne is expensive. But before the first course is served, I need to make a brief announcement regarding a fundamental change in the evening's itinerary. I paused, letting the absolute suffocating silence hang in the heavy air. I looked directly at Julian, locking eyes with him across the room. A wedding is supposed to be the blending of two families. It is a celebration of mutual respect. But this morning, a revised seating chart was quietly finalized for this room. If you look directly in front of me, at table 1, you will see the Vance family and their corporate investors. But if you turn around and look to the very back of this room, shoved into a dark corner directly next to the swinging kitchen doors and the dirty dish station, you will find table 14. 300 pairs of eyes instantly shifted toward the back of the room. The uncomfortable murmurs began to rise like a sudden wind. Table 14 is a cheap folding table, I continued, my voice cutting through the rising noise like a scalpel. It was intentionally placed there by my future mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, and she placed it there specifically to hide my father, my mother, and my sister from your sight. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. I saw Eleanor's face drain of all color. Her flawless mask of aristocratic composure shattered completely, her jaw dropping in sheer horror. My father, Arthur Miller, is an auto mechanic, I said, my voice ringing with fierce, unapologetic pride. He worked 40 years getting his hands permanently stained with engine grease so that he could buy the silk dress I am wearing right now. My mother scrubbed hotel floors so I could go to college and become a teacher. And 10 minutes ago, I stood outside a dressing room and listened to the man I was supposed to marry agree with his mother that my parents were simple people who did not fit the aesthetic of this high society event and that they belonged next to the kitchen where they wouldn't embarrass the board of directors. I looked at Julian again. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He took a step toward the stage, raising his hands, opening his mouth to desperately control the narrative. But I raised my own hand, and the sheer force of my glare stopped him. I am a teacher, I said, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. I teach 8-year-old children about respect, about human dignity, and about having the courage to stand up to bullies. I cannot look my students in the eye on Monday morning if I sign a legal document binding myself to a family that views the people I love as garbage. I held up the 3 place cards, Arthur, Martha, Emily, so the entire room could see them, and then I dropped them onto the podium. The marriage license remains blank. There will be no wedding today. To my friends, my family, and the people who actually know me, I am so deeply sorry for the inconvenience. To the Vance family, I looked down at Eleanor, who was now trembling with rage and humiliation. I highly recommend the catering. Please, enjoy your party. I did not drop the microphone. I placed it gently, carefully back onto its stand. I stepped down from the stage, and the absolute silence of the grand ballroom followed me like a heavy shadow. Not a single person spoke. Not a single glass clinked. The only sound in that massive, cavernous room was the rhythmic, deliberate click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor as I walked back up the center aisle. I was halfway to the exit when Julian finally broke through his shock. I heard his frantic footsteps behind me. "Sarah! Sarah, wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, humiliating panic. He reached out to grab my arm, but before his fingers could even brush the silk of my dress, my sister Emily materialized out of nowhere. She stepped directly between us, raising a hand and looking at Julian with a glare so fiercely protective it could have melted steel. "If you touch her," Emily said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that carried perfectly in the quiet room, "I will make sure the police are the next guests you have to entertain tonight." Julian stopped dead. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, waiting for me to call off the attack, waiting for me to play the compromising peacemaker one last time. But I just looked right through him, turned my back, and walked out the heavy mahogany doors into the cool, crisp evening air. We did not ride in the sleek black town cars that Eleanor had rented. Chloe, my maid of honor, had already pulled her battered sedan up to the curb. My father got in the front, my mother and Emily piled into the back with me, and we drove away from the country club. When we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, the screen door gave its familiar squeak as we walked inside. We were still dressed in our formal wear. I was still wearing a gown that cost a fortune in saved coins and overtime hours. And for the first time that entire day, I felt like I could finally breathe. My father went into the kitchen, picked up the landline, and ordered 3 large pepperoni pizzas. My mother took out the everyday ceramic plates, completely ignoring the fact that we were supposed to be eating braised duck on imported china. We sat around the scuffed wooden table in the kitchen, eating pizza in our wedding attire. A drop of grease fell onto the pristine white silk of my gown, and instead of panicking, I just laughed. My parents laughed. Parents. Emily opened a cheap bottle of wine, and we toasted to the best wedding reception we had ever been to. I learned very quickly that the consequences of absolute honesty are far more devastating than any revenge you could actively plot. I never posted anything on social media. I never called a journalist. I didn't have to. 300 of the most connected, influential people in the city had been sitting in that room, and in high society, reputation is currency. By the following Monday, the story had spread like wildfire through the country club circuit, the corporate boardrooms, and the charity committees. People do not like being made complicit in someone else's cruelty. The wealthy investors who had traveled to attend the wedding found the Vance family's behavior incredibly distasteful. Within a month, the Vance real estate firm lost 2 massive corporate contracts from partners who had been sitting at table 1. Eleanor Vance, a woman who had built her entire identity on social superiority, found herself suddenly, quietly excommunicated. She was not re-elected to the board of the Philanthropic Society. Her invitations to elite galas simply stopped arriving. She had tried to hide my family to protect her image, and in doing so, she completely incinerated it. Julian tried to contact me for weeks. He sent long, rambling emails blaming his mother, apologizing for his cowardice, begging for a chance to go to counseling. I never replied. I had Chloe send a formal cease and desist letter, and I permanently blocked his number. When a machine is broken beyond repair, you do not keep trying to turn the key. You walk away. That was 2 years ago. Today, I am 33 years old. I was recently promoted to vice principal of my elementary school. I rent a beautiful, sunlit apartment on the north side of the city. There are no imported marble floors, but there are large windows that let in the morning light, and I pay for it with money I earned myself. When I moved in, my dad came over on a Saturday morning in his grease-stained jeans and spent 4 hours building custom bookshelves for my living room, complaining about the drywall while ensuring every bracket was perfectly level. I bought a solid oak dining table. It doesn't have imported linens or crystal centerpieces, but it has enough chairs for Emily, Chloe, and my parents every Sunday night. I am telling you this story because I know, with absolute certainty, that someone watching this right now is sitting at table 14. Maybe it is a relationship where you are constantly being made to feel like you are hard to love. Maybe it is a job where your boss takes credit for your work and treats you like you are replaceable. Maybe it is a friendship where you are always the one compromising, always the one apologizing, always the one shrinking yourself to fit into a space that was designed to keep you small. Society tells us to be grateful we even got an invitation. They tell us to keep our heads down, to accept the bare minimum, to wait patiently for things to get better. They convince us that demanding respect makes us unreasonable, dramatic, or difficult. It is a lie. The velvet cage is still a cage. You do not need a microphone. You do not need an audience of 300 people. You do not need a dramatic speech to reclaim your dignity. You just need the quiet, unshakable realization that you and the people you love deserve more than a folding table in the dark. My name is Sarah Miller. I am a teacher, a daughter, a sister, and the owner of my own life. And I will never, ever let anyone else tell me where my place is again. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to walk away from your own table 14, please click the subscribe button and share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds all of us that we are not alone. And do not forget to become a channel member for exclusive behind-the-scenes content that we only share with our closest community. I will see you in the next video.